Hey, welcome to the Freak Show.
I'm Kristen,
And I'm Dancing David.
and we're here to talk about what's possible in a frequency-focused world.
Welcome back. And it's David and Kristen with the Freak Show. Hey, Kristen.
Hey.
Also, this week we have our special guest, Dr. Ari Levitt. Hey, Ari.
Hello.
Welcome and aloha to you out there in Hawaii. And let's get started. Ari, can you help us explain octaves? I know you play music. Kristen and I kind of tried it before in the last call, but we didn't know music as well as maybe you do.
I mean, my simple rudimentary understanding is, basically, if you take a wave and you split it in half and half and half, you have perfect octaves. So I think of it as in a guitar string, because you could create octaves on harmonics on guitar strings. So if you have a guitar string, that is, this length, right? And I see the wave of the guitar string is being small to big, big, and small. That's kind of the wave, right? If I just touch the guitar string lightly and I isolate that, I will now have two waves of half of that height, but they're equal. But the thing is that if I touch it exactly 1/3, I'll have three waves. So I don't have to touch both parts of it. It will automatically split into three because I've created a division in a perfect octave. So it will naturally find its harmony, and it will be, this is the bass pitch. This will be one octave above it. This will be two octaves above it. And I do it into fourths. It'll be fourths. And I can do three octaves above it. It gets harder and harder as you find that tone. But that's how oftentimes you'll hear harmonics on guitars, where a guy will do a guitar tone and you'll get a beautiful bell-like sound. And when they're doing a sliding, where the octave is, or where that point on the chord is in the guitar, on the string, that they could just lightly press, and then they're splitting the wave. And it only works on those harmonic points. And we saw it also when we were looking at, you were showing the demonstration of fire, with the flames coming out, and you change pitches, and the pitch will match, within whatever size or length of the distance you're constraining. And on that, we were looking at something where there was a length of fire, and there were little holes where fire was coming out, and they were blowing pitches through them, and then the shapes of the flames would change based on the pitch. And if it was on a bass pitch, it would look like a guitar string with one. If it was in several, you'd see the several, an octave up, you'd see them split up. So, that's to me, that's, obviously we could hear an octave is one exact of the same pitch and frequency, but it's a one jump higher and higher and higher. And I think of it as just being able to have either a long guitar string, or exact half of that guitar string doubled, or exactly thirds, tripled, or quads. So that's my simple explanation.
Okay.
Were you thinking of something?
And I was thinking even simpler, like just do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That second do is the next octave up, right? Is that correct? So an octave is a group of 8 notes together. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And
but it's the same note.
This is 5, 6, 7, 8. That eighth one. So an octave is 7 notes, and then that eighth one seems like a repeat, but it's really not a repeat. It's the start of the new next octave.
But you're adding a whole lot of things that are confounding variables, which is that it's not 8 notes up. 8 notes was invented by us. I could say, well, there are actually 20 notes between that scale, because when you look at different cultures and different tones, in Indian music, that might just be 4 tones up or 5 tones, but they go do, re, mi, fa, so, and so that will be what the octave is. But the main thing about it is it's the same note, just the next harmonic up. So if I decide to split that into 7 different units and call them do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, I'll still get there. If I decide to call it A, B, C, D, F, G and split into 26 units, I'll still get to Z, or I'll get to that next one. Right. So whatever's in the middle doesn't really matter. It's this exact tone, exact note, the same note. They're just one harmonic above.
Isn't it though that 16 hertz is the next octave above 8 hertz? Like it's a doubling effect?
Right.
Right. So that's why I was kind of using that. But it also is true that 8 is a double of 4 or 6 is a double of 3. Right. But we don't think of an octave as 6 or 3. We think of them as 7, but that's just because the English or the American way of doing
Only
it.
because Western music is based on a major scale. Yeah.
But in the example of the pen or the string or the guitar string that you were breaking up into parts, we usually think of that as breaking up into 2 parts. And if you have 2 parts, the part before where you put your finger and the part after where you put your finger, that's 2 parts. Those aren't octaves of each other, are they?
Well, they aren't. So it'd be one octave up because you just split, if you say this is 32 and now it's 2/16.
Right.
And so it will sound twice as high. It will sound one octave up. And yeah.
So to your point, Kristen, Dawn, my wife, who I said is very sensitive to a lot of things too, she definitely has been in the gong sessions and not resonated and felt like, ooh, that's weird. And with the dog barking in our neighborhood, the dog barking has just this frequency that just is not working for her biology. And I thought about that. I'm like, I wonder if dogs are man's best friend or women's best friend on purpose because of the frequency of which causes alarm in human beings. Because that was our first thing, was like to be the guard dog, right? So it makes sense that their pitch would alarm us, right? Compared to some other animal we could have domesticated, right? For example, kind of an interesting idea.
100%. And to go deeper with her, ask her if a dog in the wild, if she ever experienced a dog barking in the wild, it will resonate different than a domesticated dog, because domestic dogs have a completely different frequency than wild dogs barking.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
When you say wild dog, do you mean wolf?
I mean a dog living in nature, just in general.
But you have to do the same species. Compare a wild dingo with a tamed dingo, or a wild wolf with a Hollywood tamed wolf or something, right? Or because I think different animals, like I've heard cats meow, and if you heard a Siamese cat meow, a Siamese cat has the most ugly meow. It's like wow, right? Whereas other cats are cute and whatever and furry, but you're suggesting that just the domesticated part might have changed the frequency of the same animal.
Yeah, if you have a dog off a leash barking at a park, I guess I'll compare it that way because that's more realistic. So you take the leash off the dog and let the dog run and bark. It sounds very different than a dog barking inside a house at a window that wants to go chase something outside.
This reminds me, do you ever read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee?
My daughter's reading it right now and doing a book on it. Of course.
So Calpurnia was the maid, and she's a black maid working in a white house. And one time, Scout, who's the child, she has to take Scout to her house, for babysitting or something. And when she gets into her house, she starts talking in Ebonics. And like Calpurnia's, Scout doesn't understand why she sounds that way in her home, but she doesn't sound that way in the domestic home, but in the wild, back in her house where she can be free and talk as she wants to, she has a very different voice because she's a black maid, right? So you just reminded me of a wolf, or a dog barking off leash might have, speaking in the Ebonics, speaking like, talking sass to the other dogs, but then when he's back with his owner, he has to speak amicably. And that's funny.
Contained.
Mm-hmm.
So my mom always says, or has said to me since I grew up, well, it's not going to be that different where you're going because you're taking yourself with you. Right. And I thought for a long time, didn't move to California for 15 years because of that. Like, oh, California's not going to be that much better. It's still going to be me being in California. However, the environment changes you. It's not true that you are who you are in every environment that you're in. Right? It's kind of like what we're saying with the dog inside or outside or in the wild or whatever. It's the environment that I'm around, the people that I'm around, the frequencies that I'm around will influence who I am, right? And vice versa. So the pattern doesn't have to repeat, I guess is my point, right? We can create and be different beings or creators in the world depending on our environment. And in fact, we are. Is that making sense to what you were saying, Ari, about the speaking differently in different houses?
Oh, I have lots of examples of I was telling you about my friend who, was this very wonderful, sweet, docile, gentle person in English in America, but then she went to Israel to work in the hospital. And anytime you speak in Hebrew, I mean, just her tone, her voice, because in Hebrew you have to kind of like yell and hey, I'm trying to get something here. But in English, she would turn around and say, "Oh, hi, can I help you?" And so, I mean, there were, and I remember having a friend who I had that California experience in high school. I mean, I went to Mercer Island, so we had very few African Americans, but he was, the drum major, a good friend. And I remember this one time, there was one other African American kid who was at high school and they got in a fight. And man, did the language change. And I'd never heard my friend Sean talk in Black speak, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know he spoke that language. It was like a foreign language, but then because he's with all the white people in the community on Mercer Island, it's kind of a white community, I guess.
Okay.
Middle class. Yeah, so it was interesting that he really had two different identities that came out with the language with whom he was speaking.
I had today when I was supposed to jump on the call with you, David, on Zoom, and I was driving over the hills. I was visiting one of my clients that has dementia, and she's declined, Alzheimer's, and we can't call it Alzheimer's until after autopsy, but she has Alzheimer's, and she's declined significantly where she can't get up from sitting to standing anymore. So they had me go reassess and evaluate her, but it was nothing physical. Her brain wasn't sending the signal to her body to move. So she's still very strong. She just couldn't remember how to stand up, how to take a step or whatever. So I put salsa music on in the background and I went like this, we were talking about dancing, and I put my hands out and she grabbed my hands and stood right up, started moving. And so I said, okay, step, step, step. And the caregiver's jaw was like, I could have picked it up off the ground. She said, how did you get her to do that? I said, I didn't get her to do anything. It's the rhythm. Like she just borrowed the vibe. It was amazing. It was amazing. So that's her.
So this is a topic we could talk a lot about. Do you want to spend 5 more minutes exploring this before we jump off? Both of you?
Well, I'm free.
All right, it sounds like you have company.
I do. I have some folks who are here, but
okay, because this is a very interesting topic that I've been thinking about a lot lately. So can we explore it a little bit more?
Yeah. What do you want to know?
This is a question for both of you, but maybe Ari from the medical side, if you know more. I know Kristen has studied a lot of medical. The question is, how does music why is it that music carries more information than not music? In other words, we think about it as improving the memory, like in the case of her remembering how to do salsa. So if memory is more information, it sounds like music or sound set to a certain octave, if we're calling that music, carried the additional information or reinstated the muscle memory that existed before. So why is it that music was able to do that, but just regular sound was not? You see where I'm trying to explore?
So there's a whole documentary called Alive Inside about this.
Oh, okay.
One of our interviews that I had in mind was actually the producer of that. Okay. I was the city captain for the Age of Disruption tour here, and we actually did a screening of that movie. Okay. That used music to bring back people that were catatonic. Right. And they were still alive inside, right? So we were able to show like certain songs, but it had to be a personalized playlist. So it wasn't just any song. It had to be a song that was specific to bringing them back to an era.
So is it very simple then, just to say that your neural pathways remembered the time when you were 16 and therefore your body thought you were 16 and could do whatever motor functions you could do when you were 16? Is it that kind of simple? That's kind of an interesting explanation. Did they have an explanation in the movie?
I know Dr. Bill Thomas was talking about it a little bit. The music and the memory and the science of sound, they don't exactly know.
That's what I'm saying. That's cool, because that means there's more to explore. But also, if the answer's already there, I'm good with that too, No,
there's more.
What do you think, Ari?
Well, it's also true that we know that it's processed in a different part of the brain. So it may have access to like your very, very deep core primitive senses that are locked into your cerebral cortex, if you're thinking, or to your, you know, kind of the information processing part of the brain when you're just talking with someone. But suddenly you put on music, and it will very much connect to something early and profound. And we know the same is with smell. Like if you want to talk about what brings back immediate memory sense, telling someone about something and having them recall it isn't as strong as a particular odor of like, that's the ratatouille that my mother used to make, and suddenly it opens up that door, or that's the sound I used to dance to, and suddenly that sensory stimulus opens up that part of the brain in a different path. And I know that I've talked to you also, David, about how there was a friend of mine in college who had a stutter, a very bad stutter. And what was funny is that he became a stand-up comedian. Like during orientation at Stanford, he got on the stage and he gave this fantastic stand-up comedian routine. And in part of it, he started showing us how when he spoke with different accents, he was very good at doing accents. He didn't stutter because so speaking in a foreign language, he didn't stutter because it was being processed in a different part of the brain than his, you know, innate language. So, how we manage to access different parts of the brain can be a big part of it.
Super cool.
Yeah. And sound is big. And I mean, there's a lot of, we talk about why we speak in pentameter, iambic pentameter. Like iambs are the most common language rhythm that we have. And in poetry, the iambic pentameter is Shakespeare's. So the iamb is the heartbeat. It's da dun da dun da dun. Today I went to school. I did the, as opposed to like a truncating the pulse of what you do. Like if I said the word David, that's a strong, small, strong, strong and weak, strong, weak. So it's the inverse of the iamb, which is the weak, strong. But Shakespeare was a iambic person, and a lot of poetry that we speak as iambs. And some of the thought was that's the first sound we hear, even in the womb, is the sound of the mother's heartbeat. And so it naturally is embedded in our body in terms of how we hear and listen, and it's ingrained. Dun, 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 dun. And very few people talk like a robot where there is no rhythm and iamb, right? So there's always a kind of pulse and rhythm, and that can be from very early on. Who knows?
This is an interesting thing that you mentioned earlier, Kristen, about sound. I talked about sound and you mentioned music, and music is fundamentally different from sound in that it has rhythm.
Yep.
Right? So it's interesting to segue back to what you're saying now, Ari, about rhythm, right? So just the sound, that's not music. But if I go, it sounds like music, and you could maybe qualify that as music because I'm singing, but it doesn't have rhythm. It doesn't have a da da or a dee dee da da or some kind of change of the pace. And I think what's really interesting about being human is our ability to create rhythms, which I think create different structures or different responses to the otherwise is just sound. Not that we don't respond to just sound, because we do, like you did with the gongs. Right? Our body does respond to just sound. But when we hear rhythm, we really want to move and it triggers something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, think about jingles. I mean, this is a huge part of advertising, right? It's that you have a catchy rhythm and a catchy phrase, and everyone remembers that jingle. It's like, oh yeah, and you go back to your childhood, or I remember, the theme songs to cartoon shows that I shouldn't be able to remember because I don't remember the cartoons, but I remember,
Are you saying that's because of the rhythm?
Like Bewitched, yeah, so
Right.
I mean, it's a little phrase or a little catch or a advertising slogan or we connect to a tune, we remember that, we remember a kind of phrase, I mean, if I just went doon, doon, ch, doon, doon, ch, within a second, exactly what song I'm talking about,
Yep.
The very catchy riffs in guitar or in music or in, that everyone knows that riff from that song.
Right.
So we connect to memory in a way that's going to be there for all my life. I mean, I've forgotten a lot of my youth and a lot of the things that I didn't know when I was 4 or 5 years old watching TV shows. I remember I don't remember the shows that much. I don't remember much about my life when I was 5 or 6. I don't know that many memories, but I certainly could recall the tunes I learned, the songs I learned that my mother used to sing. I remember some of the TV shows, the themes from kid shows, you know. And so it's embedded in a way that's different than just my photographic memory or my day-to-day memory and images.
Right. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. What is that embeddedness quality of rhythm and music that makes it be embedded, more information in the same amount of space, right? Imagine taking your computer hard drive that has 250 gigabytes of space, and now all of a sudden you add music to it, not adding music, but if you put it in an environment where there's music, now it can store 500 gigabytes of space. It's like, is that what's happening in our brains? I don't know, because we're forgetting a lot of stuff, but it's the music that enables the recall. So why is it that music is enabling the recall or the storage and then a recall that we want to recall? I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
It feels like, and when I used to run an Alzheimer's facility, I seriously would spend hours singing to this one lady just to bring her back for like a moment. So then we can call her daughter and say, I love you to her daughter, you know, but it felt like there was expansion when that music was happening, that then, okay, in that moment it was expanded. So she was able to signal.
That goes back to what you and I were saying before, which Ari wasn't a part of, but do you have a comment on that, Ari?
Well, I was going to say that there's also something more to a musical recall, I would say, than just a straight memory recall, which is that there's often an emotionality aspect to it. So I'm almost immediately connected to some kind of emotion. And if it's like a really good feeling, it just makes me smile or makes me feel like the catatonic woman who came out from that movie, you know, Alive Inside, as part of her memory. My grandmother, who was, you know, she had severe Alzheimer's, started regressing, and her memories were speaking in Polish and singing Polish songs. It was a happy time, and it was really, really happy, you know. And she had survived a war, and I never knew she was happy because she was miserable, a war survivor with survivor's guilt, and you know, and suddenly her childhood and her happiness was very much wrapped up in music and song. So yeah, I mean, it's there's a connection there that's just much more beyond. It's unlocking other parts of our limbic system that we can access, and that was a big part of the movement. Yeah, in the movie that you mentioned, Kristen.
Okay, I have to check out that movie tonight. That's awesome. Alive Inside?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's good to end the show, the Freak Show, which is our first version of us doing together the trio show, Freak Show, if we can call it that, with a question, which I think I've praised a few times and we've explored a little bit, but it's you kind of led into it a little bit there too, Kristen, which is you talked about expansion of the brain or access to this other realm with the concept of expansion of the brain because the music was present, right? And so we talked about in our previous show, Ari, the idea of the brain being an antenna or an oscillator tuning into the field of consciousness or memories kind of that is in space beyond our brain. And so that's a good place maybe to leave it for now so we can intrigue to come back and talk about that more. Is that cool? All right. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Freak Show. Feel free to comment below in the comments on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're watching this video. Have an amazing day in harmony with yourself and those around you. See you later.